So consider this a very spoiler-free review. Bruce Willis was a ghost the whole time, Rosebud is the sled, and Jack somehow sank to the bottom of the ocean with the Titanic. Oh, sorry, I meant to say it's a spoiler-free review of Star Wars The Last Jedi.
Ain't I a stinker?
This will probably be a pretty quick video because I really enjoyed this movie, and since I am going to kind of stay as spoiler-free as possible, maybe talk about a couple scenes here or there that I don't feel really give away a lot, but they're just kind of worth mentioning when it comes to demonstrating like what works and what kind of sort of didn't work for this film for me. But overall, it's an enjoyable movie-going experience, and I'm recommending you go watch it. It's probably gonna make my top 10 of 2017. It's not quite close to the top tier stuff, just because I had a feeling I was going to enjoy it anyways, but it didn't quite grab me emotionally. Even though this is very much its own kind of story and isn't trying to pay homage too much, I feel, to its counterpart in the original trilogy, The Empire Strikes Back. There are plot elements, of course, that kind of line up with it, but these are plot elements that have been explored before in the Star Wars movies. The willful potential apprentice going under the tutelage of a master. The rebellion on the run from the Empire, and this does get to that Empire level of bleakness at a certain point, where you feel like, yeah, this could possibly be the end. And honestly, there were a couple of lifts into, say, Return of the Jedi, where you felt like there's a certain confrontation that takes place, and you're like, wow, they bumped this up in the schedule. The best thing I can say about this movie is that everyone who has certain expectations going into this film, prepare to not have those expectations met and to be perfectly okay with it. Without giving too much away, I just want to say those couple of years of theorizing things like the origins of Rey or Snoke's identity and, you know, what does this mean, what happened in between Jedi and Force Awakens. Don't expect a lot of that stuff to really get a full resolution, but what you do get and what is offered kind of in its place is fulfilling enough. Because this story is littered with characters and actors in these roles that really elevate the material. This subversion of expectations I keep talking about, it extends not just to potential revelations about certain characters and plot points, but also to like action sequences. With regards to Carrie Fisher, who, by the way, has a great role I feel in this, and Carrie Fisher does a phenomenal job. She's going to be sorely missed in the next installment. When it comes to Leia, I feel people sometimes forget that she's not just a princess, she's not just this political figurehead or this resistance figurehead, but that she's also force sensitive like her brother. And there is a moment in this movie that when it initiates, I'm like, oh man, that's something I haven't seen before in a Star Wars film. Get ready to kind of have your mind blown a little bit about like what they do with certain aspects of the Star Wars mythology and certain characters in here, is that they kind of bend them a little bit, but when they do bend them, it's something really kind of enjoyable and, like I said, very surprising and unexpected. Daisy Ridley as Rey is really good. She has some pretty good interactions on several different levels with Kylo Ren throughout this. John Boyega as Finn is also still entertaining. He's not so much of a, I guess, a bungler as he was in the previous installment. He was a solid character in that movie too, but I always felt like he was kind of hamming it up at times for the sake of like pratfalls and comedy. He doesn't do that so much. He actually has a pretty well-rounded out story with another character played by a newcomer to the franchise, and they both have good chemistry together on their particular subplot. Oscar Isaac is really committing a lot to Poe in this film. Like, because Poe has to go through several different things, from being roguish and hot-headed to kind of being a little bit more like Leia, one of Leia's only confidants at a certain point, to almost getting to the point of being straight up a mutineer. Again, that doesn't really give away too much of what happens in the film, but it's pretty interesting to watch him kind of run the gamut of all these different moments in what really is kind of a very truncated amount of time. Essentially, like, the plot of Last Jedi is borrowing elements of, say, the last Mad Max movie. It's all the main kind of central plot that everyone converges on starts off as just kind of this one long chase sequence. And throughout all that, complications arise, and that's where kind of you get into more of Finn's story, and then you see what Poe's up to, and then Daisy Ridley and Mark Hamill are off doing their thing for a while, and then that finally works its way into the finale. And throughout this whole movie, Rian Johnson really hammers home this theme of instilling hope in everybody. Like, it's not just hope in one sole hero or one legendary figure. Like how people were talking about Luke Skywalker in the last installment, and how they talk about, you know, the legends of old, the legends of the Emperor and Darth Vader and Luke, and the tales of the Jedi, essentially. That this movie very much discussed a lot of what I was exploring in one of my top 10s about why Jedi and Sith are the worst thing to happen to the Star Wars universe. And let me tell you, it is so empowering to have Luke Skywalker call out the Jedi on their shit in this movie. Like, pretty much everything I said in that video with regards to how the Jedi back in the old days conducted themselves, Luke brings to the forefront at a certain point. Like, he's saying, like, the Jedi got complacent, they got lazy, or they got, you know, short-sighted, and they let Sidious, the Emperor, kind of take over stuff. And I'm like, yeah, thank you. The Jedi were idiots in those movies. Cranky old man Luke is kind of the greatest thing. I really, really enjoyed what Mark Hamill was doing in this movie, because it borders on just being a curmudgeon to actually being a really traumatized individual. Like, Luke is shell-shocked, and you never really understand why he is the way he is, because then you kind of get opposing viewpoints on a certain event that takes place in their past, and you get kind of two sides of the same story, and somewhere in the middle lies the truth, and that truth is very human and very kind of emotionally devastating for the parties involved. So like I said, Mark really does a great job of kind of playing both this kind of weathered and worn out heroic figure to being this really fragile but yet still wise individual. Despite me saying that, like, this can get as bleak as Empire, there's quite a few laughs in here that actually work. The opening sequence actually starts off with Poe being something of a smartass towards the First Order. And at first I'm kind of like, wow, he's being extremely cavalier with his life right now. But it ends up working because, god damn it, Oscar Isaac is just such a charming smartass. And you love to see Domhnall Gleeson flustered. Let's talk about Adam Driver as Kylo Ren now, because what he did in The Force Awakens, even though I was kind of at that moment kind of thinking like, okay, yeah, they're really upping the stakes. As I revisited that movie time and again, I kept kind of feeling like, you know what? It's still kind of weak sauce. It is retrospectively a little bit too flimsy for a character motivation for this guy to suddenly just be that main baddie. Here in Last Jedi, they do flesh it out a little bit more, but it still is kind of rooted in this massive inferiority complex that Kylo has. Throughout a lot of this, he's talking about, like, just bury the past. You know, the past is dead, we gotta move on and forge something new. And I can get behind that. But then when it comes to him, like, confronting the actual past that he wants to bury so bad, and you see him kind of trembling or second-guessing or doubting himself on that, it kind of works, and then it also kind of feeds into the fact, like, huh, again, one of our big baddies really just reverts to kind of whining. He doesn't do that quite so much in here as he did in the previous installment, but it goes from him being whiny and kind of wearing his insecurities on his sleeve to him all out embracing nihilism at one point. And I'm kind of like, alright, this is different. And I was willing to go along with the ride for that for a bit, but then he flip-flops right back to just being a pure rage-induced kid. Which I guess is kind of the moral of the story, is that underneath all this terror and fervor, Kylo Ren is just a messed up kid. One other thing that didn't take away from my viewing of the movie, but I just kind of noticed every once in a while, this movie, as much as it was trying to have lighter moments, was really going for pratfalls at times. I'm not saying it was a bad thing at all or took away from the overall experience of the movie. It was just something I noticed, is that especially when Finn and his cohort Rose get to a certain point in the plot, and it almost becomes an Ocean's 11 movie. And finally, to kind of wrap up this really quick video log on The Last Jedi, which again, I'm recommending you go watch because it is a fun movie. And yeah, I went in really not knowing what to expect, and I'm pleasantly surprised. I didn't cry at any point in this movie. I didn't cry. But there was a moment, and I'll own up to this moment. I squealed like a 5-year-old at one point, because there's a certain scene that happens in this movie that I really wasn't expecting. I thought there's no way the filmmakers will incorporate this into a modern-day Star Wars movie. At first, my initial reaction was like, that's unexpected and a little too fan servicey for my tastes. But then as the scene continued, a lot of delightful memories from my childhood start to just resurface as the scene just played out. Yeah, I couldn't help but kind of delight in it. It brought a huge smile to my face, and you could hear like kind of this awed gasp reverberate throughout the audience. It was a moment that I don't think anyone was really expecting. If you've already seen the movie, I'm sure you know which moment I'm talking about. It caught me totally off guard, and I'm okay with that. And that's kind of what I'm getting back to with my review of The Last Jedi, is that you're gonna go in with certain things in mind, certain theories that you've plotted out for a couple of years now. They won't quite pay off the way you're anticipating them to. You might think you have an idea of, or a trajectory of where this movie's going. It will subvert those expectations, but in such a pleasant way and in such a delightful way that it'll make you appreciate this franchise again. I mentioned on the Three Geeks podcast in a couple of episodes how my interest in Star Wars, just because of the marketing of it. And don't get me wrong, the pre-screening ad rolls and stuff like that before this movie really kind of were not putting me in the mood for the film. It was everything was Star Wars merchandise. Porg this, porg that. Oh, by the way, the porgs, yeah, they're in the movie. They're perfectly fine. They're not like Ewok or Jar Jar levels of annoying. They're just there in the background, and they do make for one kind of funny sight gag at a certain point with Chewbacca. But yeah, they're there. There's a bunch of CGI and practical critters all over the place. Nothing too, you know, invasive or too much of a nuisance like, you know, a certain character we all know. But yeah, for a while I was kind of thinking, do I have it in me to have this passion for Star Wars still, or this interest in this story, if we're going to be getting a film related to this universe every year? And honestly, The Last Jedi staved off that, again, nihilism for another year or so. Like, this is a solid film. It's really well crafted, really well written, really well acted, and it's going to completely go left when you expect it to go right, and you won't be mad about it. So, balls in your court, Han Solo movie that has fired its original directors and has gone through some major tonal shifts. Till next time, may the Force be with you.